Welcome back to our study on Mark's Gospel. Today we are in Mark chapter 10, and we're going to pick it up in verse 28 and go through the rest of the chapter. Because I shouldn't say in part, simply because I forgot some things in the last video and I need to address them before moving on. I tend to forget things when I get into a hurry, and I forgot to address a couple of parts of the first half of Mark 10. So I want to address first the in verses 28 and following, that little paragraph. Peter says to Jesus, "Hey, we have left everything to follow you." And Jesus says, "Yeah, good job." He's both highlighting the good job that the disciples are doing following him, the fact that they will be rewarded, and also saying, "Hey, um, lots of people are going to give up things. Don't think you're terribly special here. This is just the way of the kingdom, and everybody who gives up something will be repaid." This is, of course, in contrast to the rich man who did not want to give up any of his possessions for the poor. Peter is saying, "Hey, we gave up things to follow you." Jesus is going to say, "Good job," and keep going, because that's where we're at. That's where people need to be. It's also important to note that the one relationship that Jesus says, or doesn't say, I should say, put it this way, the one relationship he never talks about in this section is giving up spouse. Jesus never talks about being able to give up a spouse. And so we should take that very seriously, since he had already talked about marriage in this section, and say, wow, Jesus really does think that not even God can get in the way of the marriage relationship. In other words, somebody can't give up their spouse in that way to follow Jesus. Yeah, you might break some family bonds to follow Jesus. You might have some difficult decisions to make regarding your parents or children to follow Jesus. But the one thing you can't give up on is your spouse. That's really important, and that is something that we should look at in some detail and just kind of think about, because Jesus doesn't, when he has the opportunity to speak in terms of giving up spouse for another spouse, that is the ministry of God, he doesn't say that. It would have been a great analogy in this point, and he doesn't use it. It leads us to think, wow, he's got a very high opinion of marriage. The other thing that is important before I move on to the rest of this section is I overlooked talking about how Jesus elevates women in his teaching on divorce. In first century Judaism, women did not have a lot of rights. We talked about that in the last video, but Jesus elevates them and says, in a way, that they are equal to men in the marriage relationship and the marriage covenant in this section. He does it very subtly, as he has to, but he does elevate them in saying that they have, that when you divorce a woman, you are sinning against her. The idea is for, in Judaism at the time, you as a man who divorced a woman was not sinning against her. A man who slept with another woman was not sinning against his wife. He did not owe anything to the woman in that way. He did not owe his wife the commitment of marriage. He did not owe sexual faithfulness the same way that a wife did. Jesus is elevating the status of women. I heard it said recently, and it is very, very true, that one of the things that the New Testament does that we don't often notice because we take it for granted and we don't understand first century culture is the New Testament says to men that they must act towards their wives in a manner that is fitting of a good wife towards her husband. So there were cultural expectations for good wives and how they should live towards their husbands. The New Testament does a very good job and is very thorough about saying to men, hey, you expect this from your wife. you need to also give her that same love and respect. We don't think about it because that's not how we tend to think about marriage in terms of it being one-sided, but this is one of major the major innovations of the New Testament. So and that comes from Jesus's teaching here on divorce. We need to really read this in terms of first century culture and see how revolutionary this would have been and how much it set the stage for how we think about marriage and divorce today. So Jesus then proceeds to teach the disciples. He keeps going on the path. In Mark, he doesn't tell us this straightforward, but Jesus is going to Jerusalem. He's been going to Jerusalem since the Transfiguration. Everything about his journey is leading him to Jerusalem. He's teaching on the way. Luke makes this explicit in chapter 9, saying that Jesus set his face towards Jerusalem and then starts teaching in regards to Jerusalem. And he progresses that direction. And you are to think the entire time Jesus is preparing us for Jerusalem, preparing us for Jerusalem. Mark's doing the exact same thing. Here again, Jesus brings up his death and resurrection. But again, the disciples don't understand what's going on. Jesus is trying to explain to them what will happen in Jerusalem, but they don't get it. They don't understand because they can't imagine that the king and prophet will be killed. They just can't fathom that. And we can't blame them too much. They did not have a framework to neatly pack this into the way we do. We know the end of the story, so we can understand this. But just like Jesus has tried now, this is the third time to explain his death, they still don't get it. They haven't had their eyes opened. And we're going to see that later in this chapter. Instead, James and John come to Jesus and they say they want to be on his right and left in his kingdom. So Jesus has just talked about he's going to be crucified. He's going to be killed. He doesn't say crucified, but he's going to be killed. And he's going to die. And James and John are showing how ignorant they are in saying, hey, we want to be at your right and left hands. They don't mean in his death, although Jesus will kind of allude to that, that those positions are already determined. He's saying that he's going to be crucified and there's going to be people on his right and left, and it's not going to be you guys. James and John, though, we notice Peter has been doing a lot of the talking. James and John do the rest of the talking. And these are Jesus's three closest disciples. These are the three who saw the transfiguration. These are the three who should know what's going on, and they are the most ignorant, or at least they seem like it. They want the positions of power. They want to be that inner circle. Jesus has made them the inner circle. They want to be the inner circle, but they don't understand what it means to be the inner circle with Jesus. They don't understand the humility. They don't understand the servitude. They don't understand what Jesus is going to go through and what they must go through and how they have to give up themselves. We see Jesus say, give up yourself, and Peter goes, hey, we've done that. Jesus says, hey, I'm going to go die. James and John, we want to be at your right and left. They're echoing Jesus without truly understanding what it means. I think this is both a warning to us and something that can bolster us. It's a warning that sometimes we need to relax ourselves and try to understand more of what Jesus is doing before we jump in praising ourselves or talking about where we want to be in the kingdom. We need to slow ourselves down and actually talk with Jesus about what he's doing and what's going on. The way that it is a praise is that these three end up being very much the inner circle. In a lot of ways, they become what they wanted, and they become the authorities that they want to, but it's not without some difficulty. In other words, yes, it's a warning to us that we don't always understand what we ask for, but it's also glorious to think that, hey, these guys, they didn't get it, and Jesus still worked with them and used them and eventually elevated them to the place where in their ignorance they wanted to be, but now they've reached it in the ways Jesus wanted them to reach it. They've gotten to the place. James and John, in many ways, have been elevated to the positions of authority that they wanted to, or at least after Jesus' resurrection, they become leaders in the church the way they wanted to. But it took a complete reevaluation of who they are and what was going on in order for them to reach that. The same is true of Peter, who says to Jesus, "Hey, we've given up everything." Little did he know what it would mean to give up everything. Later on, he will give up everything, and because of that, he will earn a reward. He will be rewarded for what he gave up. Then, after James and John make this, they make this declaration. Jesus kind of confronts them. He does also say that, hey, we got to be careful. This is not how my kingdom's set up. You guys want positions of power, you want authority, you want to be the greatest, but in my kingdom, that's not how it works. Greatness comes from serving others, serving the lowly, the meek, the people who can't help you, the people who can't rise to the situation and put you in power. If you want power, you're in the wrong place. If you want to be the leader, the authority, you're in the wrong place. If you want this role, you're in the wrong place. And we need to honestly evaluate that in our churches today, how much people want to be in leadership and why they want to be in leadership, instead of serving and helping the lowest of the church and the surrounding society. From there, Jesus goes on to Jericho, and it's here he will heal the blind man. The blind man is actually named. This is great. It's the first time we get a name associated with a person, or one of the few times, I should say, that we get a name associated with a person, Bartimaeus. And he comes to Jesus asking Jesus for healing. And it's this wonderful confession. He said, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And this is just awesome. This prayer has been used throughout church history. It is typically called the Jesus Prayer. It's not used from this particular passage, but one of the other Gospels, and it is where Bartimaeus says, Lord Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me, a sinner. And it's often shortened to Lord, have mercy. The Kyrie eleison. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. This prayer has been this idea that it is when we are most humble and begging for mercy that we have our eyes open to who Jesus is. There's a theological takeaway here. Bartimaeus doesn't, he looks for mercy. He doesn't come out looking for healing inherently. He looks for mercy. Now, the mercy is going to imply healing, but just the word, Lord, have mercy on me. It's just a fantastic way to approach Jesus. And of course, just like we've said with other places, the blind man represents all of us as disciples learning to see Jesus. And Jesus responds to his cry for mercy with call him. And the people run to get Bartimaeus so that he can be healed. And he's so excited. He's jumping down. He's running, as much as he can to Jesus. I can say from personal experience, running when you can't see is difficult and scary. And it's not something that, a blind man hurrying is, it's overcoming something. So it's overcoming a fear. But we can almost see him hurrying to Jesus as fast as he can. And Jesus heals him. Uh, this idea that Jesus is going to give sight to not just this blind man, but us. And the sight is going to come in the very next chapter as we begin to see who Jesus is in the triumphal entry. So again, we've had the healing of the deaf man that is meant to kind of show us how the disciples need to hear. We've had the healing of the blind man twice now, that the disciples need to see. They need to have their eyes open. Here again, James and John have said something rather foolish that they didn't completely understand, and now Jesus is going to heal a blind man right before he shows them the true meaning of their words. So that's the wrap up of chapter 10. Next week, we're going to go into the triumphal entry and Jesus's last week. I haven't quite decided if I'm going to how I'm going to do those videos. I may slow it down a little bit more and focus a little bit more intently on each individual section. Maybe I'll do a video for each day of the week that Jesus was in Jerusalem. I haven't quite decided how to do that, but I'm thinking about it. As always, if you have questions or comments, please let me know. I would love to deal with them. And until we meet again, God bless.